I'm Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drill Down. Well, there are attacks on drug ships, drug boats taking place right now, conducted by the U.S. military. Are they a good idea? And are they actually legal? Those are the questions we're going to discuss today with one of the top attorneys in Washington, D.C., who is a national security expert. The co-host of this program, of course, is Eric Eggers. Eric, how are you?
Hey, talking about two of my favorite things that might be good and things that might be illegal. You know, why is there such a gap in the Venn diagram there?
That's exactly right. So a lot of people are aware these strikes are taking place on drug boats that are shipping drugs off the coast of Venezuela. There's been a wild reaction against this by a number of quarters. Listen to this audio clip from the media and from leading decision makers in Washington, D.C.
It's hard not to think that they blew up the boat and then had orders to kill anybody else there because they didn't know who was on the boat. And they didn't want to be exposed as killing fishermen.
The Trump administration is saying that they care so much about stopping drugs from coming into the country that they're going to bomb the guys on a fishing boat but set free the guy who ran the cartel?
Last one, I've heard this argument, foreign policy circles, where people say, you know, if the U.S. is just firing on boats left and right in their sphere of the world, what's to stop China from doing the same thing? To saying, look, I think that drug boat is coming off of Taiwan or whatever, and that we sort of we're modeling the behavior that other people will take.
That's right.
Jonathan mentioned the U.S. military says it launched another strike yesterday on a suspected drug smuggling boat in the eastern Pacific Ocean. The U.S. Southern Command released this short video of the attack, announcing that 4 so-called narco-terrorists on board were killed. Once again, no evidence supporting allegations about the boat or its passengers.
We are bootstrapping an argument that takes people that are thousands of miles away or more than 1,000 miles away, some of which who are not even heading to this country, who are not engaged in an armed attack on this country, and we are somehow labeling them invading enemy combatants to justify their extrajudicial killing. And that doesn't make it lawful.
Senator,
coming up with some legal rationale doesn't make it lawful.
Senator, let me ask you about the president's argument that he is making this week. He said, quote, I think you're going to find that this is
the idea that this particular military unit has decided to pick random boats in the Caribbean and use lethal force against it. That just undermines all of the justifications that the administration has used here.
President of the United States is a killer. I am outraged at the way that on his own, without any consultation or without appears to be the kind of in-depth investigation that would take place, or even trying to enter the boats and find out who the people are and ask questions. He's done nothing but kill.
Those are the well-known military strategists Joe Scarborough and Maxine Waters. But listen, here is the argument that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, make in justifying these strikes.
The days in which these narco-terrorists, designated terror organizations, operate freely in our hemisphere are over. These narco-terrorists are the Al-Qaeda of our hemisphere, and we are hunting them with the same sophistication and precision that we hunted Al-Qaeda. We are tracking them, we are killing them, and we will keep killing them so long as they are poisoning our people with narcotics so lethal that they're tantamount to chemical weapons.
So every boat we knock out of the water, every boat, we save 25,000 American lives. That was a boat loaded up with drugs. I saw the video. They were trying to turn the boat back to where it could float. And we didn't want to see that because that boat was loaded up with drugs just like everything else. But every boat we shoot down, and I don't know if you know, we're 92 or 94% down in drugs coming in by the sea. And we're trying to find who are the 6%, because I don't know, people aren't liking to drive boats right now loaded up with drugs. But every single, think of that, every single boat we shoot out, on average, we save 25,000 American lives. Do you feel okay about that, Court?
Keep us safe.
Okay, I know my men. What about you? Are you okay with that?
I'm totally fine with that.
So those are the two different arguments. Let's bring in an actual legal expert, Eric. Brian Finch, he's a partner at Pillsbury Winthrop, which is one of the most prominent firms in Washington, D.C. He co-chairs our global security practice. I will point out he is here in his private capacity as an individual. He's not speaking for the law firm per se. He's also a senior advisor to the Homeland Security Defense Business Council at the Department of Homeland Security and a former visiting legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Brian, thanks for joining us. What is your take? Are these strikes legal or are they war crimes?
I mean, of course they're legal. And the arguments against them are as pathetic as they are predictable. Anything the president does is obviously the greatest travesty in the history of humankind. The man could cure cancer, and someone would say that's because he hates oncologists, right? And that's the only reason he did it. And it's the same thing here. I mean, obviously the president has the authority as the commander-in-chief under the Constitution to defend the United States. Not everything requires an act of Congress, a declaration of war. He's declared them to be a terrorist group. We know that Venezuela has acted against the United States a number of times through the years, including under the Maduro regime. And these terrorist groups, these narco-terrorists, are involved in so many different illegal activities that go beyond simple criminal activity. They go into really dangerous areas. And so, of course, the president has the authority to undertake these attacks. And if Congress wants to step in and try and stop the president, they're welcome to do so, but they haven't done so. Congress is saying, in effect, we are okay with this. If it reaches a point where we're uncomfortable or we believe the president is acting in a manner that is unconstitutional, we will take those steps. But the president has the authority to do so under the Constitution, and these strikes, all we're talking about is wisps of evidence and rumors and innuendo to say that there are violations of the law of war. And there's just nothing there. It's a total straw man argument.
Well, and to the extent that Donald Trump does have the legal authority to do so, despite what Maxine Waters said when she's saying Donald Trump is a killer, my understanding, Brian, and I think this is kind of what's informing your argument, is Donald Trump would not be the first president of the United States to authorize such things this way against maybe non-officially declared enemy combatants. Is that not correct?
I mean, this goes back centuries. I mean, even the 20th century, FDR ordered shoot on sight for U-boats before we declared war against Germany, right? And more recently, President Obama issued a controversial, but thus far still deemed legal, executive order and a policy saying that he had the right to drone strike and kill any American citizen. Remember that, American citizen, as opposed to foreign national that were deemed terrorists or suspected being terrorists that were imminent threats to the United States, whatever that meant.
Now, hang on, Brian. I want to play clips of Maxine Waters calling Barack Obama a killer. 1 second. Oh, those don't exist. I'm sorry. Continue.
I'm sorry. You may have to dig a little deeper for those. But of course, I mean, it's all hypocrisy. Again, this is just anything the president does, regardless of how good it is for the American people, he's going to catch flack for it. He even said it earlier this year. I had the privilege of being in the audience when he was speaking to the joint session of Congress. And he said, it doesn't matter what I do, you guys are going to hate me and tell me I'm wrong. And this is just another example of it.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, Brian, the absurd arguments that are made in this particular case. You mentioned, or I should say it was mentioned in the video clip we played earlier, several people saying that these were fishing boats, which, by the way, I've never seen a cigar-shaped fishing boat. I've never seen a fishing boat traveling that fast. And I've never seen a fishing boat without fishing lines in the water or nets out at sea.
Right.
But anyway, let's talk a little bit about the procedures and the process. I mean, I know you're not in the national security apparatus, but you're familiar with it to some extent, as I am. It's not as if there's a boat out at sea and the Navy says, hey, let's blow it up. I mean, there's actual intelligence that goes into identifying these targets. There's a chain of command that is made. It's not a decision being made by Trump, correct? I mean, the commander-in-chief and the civilians are saying, here is the objective. We want any, narco ships, boats that we can identify destroyed. And there is an intricate process. It just seems to me that when Joe Scarborough is saying This is a fishing boat, and they killed everybody because they didn't want witnesses to their war crime. He's indicting all of these men and women serving in the Navy and basically saying they're butchers and killers.
Again, it's ridiculous. It's a straw man argument. I mean, nobody's going to Long John Silver's or whatever fast food restaurants are out there today saying, oh, sorry, we don't have anything because Trump is killing our entire food supply chain at this point. It's not happening. And you're exactly right, Peter. There is an enormous amount of investigation, surveillance, et cetera, identifying these targets. When they use the word suspected drug boat, it's not as if they're going to the harbor and saying, that looks suspicious. It says cocaine deliverer on the back of the boat, and therefore we're going to bomb it. This is actual intelligence that is going on. An actual chain of command and sophisticated techniques and evidence that's being used to identify these targets. Nobody's saying that they're going to be perfect either, but it's not the amateur hour just bombing random boats that are filled with people who look kind of shady, and we've decided that they think they might have fentanyl or they might have cocaine or some other illegal narcotic on board, and so let's just blow them up because we think it looks good and it'll sound good to the MAGA base. It's just not true.
I don't know. I can see
no way it's possible.
I can see the Media Matters headline now. Schweizer, war crimes okay because fishing boat not swaggy enough, right? That you don't have enough equipment, so that makes it all right. But actually, Peter, because this is something that and this is an interesting, I think, aspect of this related to something that you have spent time reporting on, and that is this concept of unrestricted warfare. That's part of the rationale. That's an argument that's being made about what Venezuela may be up to. You actually have some reporting from the Miami Herald and elsewhere that you've got a former Venezuelan spy chief suggesting that this is like, it's not just business to run drugs to here, but it's an intentional effort to wage unrestricted warfare against the United States on behalf of Venezuela and sympathetic, I guess, allies. What's your assessment of that, and how would you evaluate that compared to like what you know to be the case in China?
Well, I think it's a very apt comparison, and I'd love to get Brian's take on it, because one of the arguments, again, that critics are making is that Trump has not identified a quote-unquote imminent threat, which is ironic given that the Obama administration was literally bombing people in caves in Afghanistan, halfway around the world, didn't have any remote possibility of coming to the United States to do anything. We're not engaged in any military action against U.S. forces in Afghanistan. They are in freaking caves, but they happen to be part of the military apparatus that was fighting us. And what I find interesting with regard to Venezuela, and Brian, jump in, is there is this notion that China has embraced called unrestricted warfare or disintegration warfare, which is warfare below a kinetic fighting war. How can we destroy or harm our enemy by selling them drugs, engaging in criminal activity, promoting acts of violence that we can't be fingerprinted for in a manner that weakens our enemy? And I think if you look at what's happening with Venezuela, you have the Cartel of the Suns, which is basically a Venezuelan government drug cartel that is not only selling drugs and making money, but Brian, they're also involved in subversive activities against the United States and our allies. So am I missing something here? If I see an imminent threat by the drug gangs in Venezuela, this is not just about selling drugs. It's something bigger.
No, you've hit on the exact point. Everything you said is true. And this is the distinction that the legacy media doesn't want you to draw. This is not a legal issue. This is a policy issue. You can disagree with the policy, but you can't disagree with the legality of it. And that's what they're trying to do in saying that this is an open and shut case of a violation of the law and war. Anytime you hear someone say this is an open and shut case, you know it's not, in fact, an open and shut case. You're picking and choosing. You're creating the straw man. You're creating your own scenario in order to create whatever outcome you want. And that's exactly what's happening with the media these days. And you're right. This type of low-level warfare, it's been going on forever. I mean, remember what the Soviets would do to us during the Cold War, proxy warfare in Asia, in South America, in Latin America, in Africa, and other areas, et cetera. You know, all the wild stories that the Soviets would dismiss about our pilots aren't fighting in Korea. They're not fighting in Vietnam. How dare you say those things? Well, it turns out they actually were piloting some of those planes. that were supplying arms, that were being subversive, et cetera. It's the same thing that is happening again here in the media. The people in the media, the Trump haters, they just don't want to admit that that trend continues into this day.
Brian, does it matter that if it's the threat of drugs that we're attempting to combat, that, according to the government and DEA's own figures, I believe like 93% of the drugs that get in this country are coming via the Mexican or Central American corridor, otherwise not from Venezuela, and maybe only 6 to 7% are coming what's called the Caribbean corridor, which is where they're currently bombing. Does that matter at all?
Again, that's a policy choice. The president is deciding where he wants to confront them. And I would argue he's actually confronting it on all fronts, particularly what he's doing on immigration, where he's, cracking down by ICE raids and remilitarizing the border to make sure that we actually control a border. I don't know why it's such a shock and so upsetting to people that we can actually choose who comes into the country, but somehow that's offensive to a lot of people. And he's deciding, yes, this in conjunction with other things that in due time the American people will know about, we will brief Congress about, et cetera. I've decided that this is a serious threat to the United States, and I'm going to take action against it. And you see these numbers about fentanyl, for example, that are killing people by tens of thousands on an annual basis. It's a crisis people want to ignore, especially in the liberal media. But President Trump has decided I am going to confront it, and good for him.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brian. I would just add that the other point to make is it's not as if the only thing Trump is doing is going after these boats. I mean, he has a holistic approach to try to deal with the fentanyl trafficking coming from Mexico. In the case of Venezuela, of course, it's cocaine primarily that we're talking about. But I want to get back, Brian, to this larger issue of policy, which I think you're right. This is where we really need to focus. And what is, I think, particularly disconcerting for me is we used to have this concept of the loyal opposition. Right? You disagreed with somebody, but you did not besmirch the character of the U.S. military, the military brass. You didn't call them war criminals. You could disagree with the president, but you wouldn't call him a murderer and a killer. And during the Gulf War, there was a lot of controversy. I know there were some people, particularly libertarians like Ron Paul, who would criticize both George W. Bush and criticize Barack Obama. But increasingly, it seems as if, bipartisanship ends at our nation's shore, or doesn't even exist there to begin with. In other words, we have this huge division on what used to be clear-cut cases. We might disagree with your policy, but we are not going to besmirch you. That seems to be gone. Are we ever going to get back to that, or is that something that is just gone and never to return?
It's going to be a bit of a slog, unfortunately. Maybe we'll have it in retrospect. I mean, look at the way that, Dick Cheney was lionized at his funeral, right? And the way that, President, the second George Bush has been treated in retrospect. I'm old enough. We're all, we've all been there, and we've seen, how they were being called war criminals. They were being called the worst people on the planet when they launched the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and making all these bad decisions in Afghanistan and everything that they've done. But now all of a sudden they're canonized in the media. And what's the common thread? It's for real. Trump derangement syndrome. There is just such an unbelievable hatred of everything President Trump does. It doesn't matter what action he's taking, why he's doing it, how right he is. People will just instinctively reject him and anybody associated with him, which is it's sad. Honestly, it's really just sad that people can't take a step back and be objective about anything these days. I hope we get there. Maybe the dam is breaking a little bit. It seemed like it the first couple of months of the administration, but we're backsliding.
Well,
so,
let me just say,
here's my question. Here's my question for both of you, Eric. I'm going to ask you first, and that is all the discussion that has been out there about the possibility of Trump maybe actually going into Venezuela. He's even hinted at this himself. Eric, do you think that's going to happen? And then I want to hear your reaction as well, Brian.
So I think it will not happen, and I'll tell you why. Because I think everything Brian said also makes me think, like, as he was speaking, we think about like the political aspect of it. And what I think this Trump derangement syndrome that these strikes have provoked, I think are actually very good politically for the Trump administration at a time when other policies might not be as good politically, right? Like if we're still struggling to get the affordability issue under control, and there's some still, and there's people are complaining about tariffs or other issues. What this has done, these strikes, I mean, you and I, Peter Schweizer, talked about the Somali fraud in the Medicaid in Minnesota last week. And what that's done is that's caused people to say, well, you're racist if you're going after this fraud in Minnesota. So the left likes to embrace Somali fraudsters. In this case, they're having to embrace Venezuelan drug traffickers and not the families of people who are dying because of the drugs. And it's true, you said it's cocaine, not fentanyl. The cocaine deaths in this country are up to 23,000 as of 2023. That's up from 14,000 5 years before. So we are seeing a spike there. But I just say that to say, I think this is actually a winning political issue for Donald Trump. So they're disincentivized to stop doing it. I think escalating in terms of ground troops would shift it. Most of the coalition that supports Donald Trump very much likes the no new war. So I expect him to stay in that area.
Brian?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we do some Air Force bombings in Venezuela to take out some targets or, some Maduro's assets, et cetera. But to think that we'll actually have a large scale invasion, I mean, that would, without knowing anything in the inside of the president's brain or his National Security Council, I mean, that would surprise me. And the president has been pretty clear through the years that he's not really interested in getting into any deep military conflicts. And so, there's a big difference between flexing muscles and acting tough and punching down a little bit, if you will, versus actually going in whole hog and trying to take over another country. That just doesn't seem to make sense in this environment and match up with what the president's priorities are.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me. Well, I want to get both of your final thoughts on where this is going to lead. Are we looking at a situation where if the Democrats retake the House, we might actually have another impeachment over this issue, or we might have congressional committees trying to, get rid of the war secretary or investigate the brass? Or is this just sort of your typical political maneuver where they feel like they need to be oppositional, they're being oppositional? What do you think, Brian?
Oh, I think for their base purposes, I would take off my shoes to count the number of times they're going to try to impeach President Trump if they take back the House. I mean, it's not going to be once, it's not going to be twice, it's going to be many, many times. It's also not going to succeed ever. But they're going to do it as a political showboating because that's what their base wants and that's what their people want to see. And yeah, it's absolutely going to happen. And they'll try all these congressional maneuvers to limit the president's ability to take actions to defend America. And to your earlier point, it's going to be really unfortunate because there's a lot of good that can be done on a bipartisan basis, but people just don't seem to want to do anything like that.
Eric?
No, I totally agree. I think, to Brian's point, there are many, many issues that the Democrats will attempt to impeach Donald Trump on. And this is minor impeachment. This isn't Catcher in the Rye. This is Franny and Zoe. And so, and yes, that's a J.D. Salinger reference, which is an author that many people who are deranged carry with them when they attempt to perform shootings. And so I think Donald Trump has this effect. They make people go crazy. And I think that they will react to whatever the latest story is, and that will be an impeachment. I don't think that's that this specifically, just because, I mean, to your point, Peter, I guess my closing thought is 6 days ago, the Miami Herald, which is a very reputable newspaper, reported about this letter that this Venezuelan spy chief wrote in which he's confessing many things, including that he helped to run this network from Venezuela that coordinates drug routes designed to harm the United States, collaborates with Colombian guerrilla groups, and has worked with Cuban operatives and Hezbollah. And so here you have someone who is confessing these things. It's been reported in major media outlets, and you've heard nothing about it, I think, because it would seem to support the idea that Venezuela actually is a threat, which is very much counter to the narrative being pushed by so many people we heard at the beginning of this podcast.
Yeah, he's a very interesting source. Goes by the nickname El Polo, the chicken, and he was a top intelligence official in the Venezuelan government. was actually indicted by the U.S. government, Brian, on drug trafficking charges, and then was in hiding in Spain, was captured, and has now flipped and has given a list of a large number of politicians around the world to which he says the Venezuelan government has funded. So there is a political component to that. Brian, your final thoughts on where this is going? Is Trump going to succeed? Is the tumult going to continue with the Democrats? Or do you think attention is going to shift somewhere else anytime soon?
Well, given the progression of this, I assume that Democrats are soon going to accuse the president of violating some sort of intergalactic treaty because they've gotten bored with state and federal crimes and they've moved on to international law. So next one will be some sort of space law or Star Trek type of violation. But in all seriousness, this will wax and wane. There will be something else that the president does that people will get very upset about, and that will be the latest focus. It's just this laundry list of opposition to everything that he's doing. And it's going to continue. But the thing is, if you haven't figured it out already, let me break it to you. Donald Trump's really good at what he does. And he's in this term, he's figured a lot of things out. He's got a lot of really smart lawyers and policy people sitting behind him. I don't bet against him. I just really don't. I think he will figure it out. He's such a unique figure in American history that he really has figured out how to, succeed and win over a good portion of the American populace in a way that nobody else has done. It's just remarkable, and hats off to him.
Eric, your final thoughts.
I think I tend to agree. I think it'll be interesting to see how this progresses. But I think as long as Donald Trump is on the side of killing drug dealers and saving lives of people who might otherwise be subject to drug overdoses, that seems to be a relatively unassailable position, regardless of the media hysteria and histrionics. And I think it's a winning issue for Donald Trump, and so he likes wins. So I would not expect it to stop anytime soon.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a very sympathetic series of articles in the New York Times or Washington Post and documentaries that we can stream about all the people who really suffered and the true criminals. But, that's for people, again, who, that's how they allay their Trump derangement syndrome. They can enjoy consuming that. I'll be doing the crossword.
Well, we've been joined by Brian Finch for this episode. Brian, we appreciate you making the time. He's one of the top attorneys in this space in Washington, D.C. Again, reminder, he's speaking in his private capacity, not for his firm. And we appreciate you, the audience, for always taking the time to listen. You can find out more about the research we do at thedrilldown.com, and please subscribe to our podcast. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.